welcome to Quilting with Don. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to join the ends of a binding. I'm going to do something different because this is going to be an instructional video. Not more of the watch Don do something, but actually watch Don teach, dare I say, something. As I'm sure you've done any looking around on the internet, there's many ways to put together details on a binding. I discovered through a combination of some research myself, and I came across a great video that gave me, let's say, at least half of what I'm going to show you. So I got to give credit to this gentleman that did it. There's a link at the top. And then Carolyn, my fabulous quilting advisor, also gave me some great ideas. So as a result, what I'm going to show you is pretty cool. And the hook for this is there's no fussy measuring. There's no rotor work, in fact. There's no math. Everything is done visually and with pins and and scissors. So, how's this going to work? Well, there's going to be 4 steps. There's going to be sew, then cut, then join, and then sew. That sounds all right, eh? And these are not difficult skills. So, to start this off, first what you'd have to do is get yourself ready. So obviously you need a quilt top to what you're going to bind, and you need to know how long or what the perimeter length is so that you can determine how long to make your binding. Now your binding can be 2.5 inches, 2.25 inches. It can be whatever width you want that you then are going to fold over on itself and iron, so you'll have a double layered strip. And that's the type of binding I'm going to show you how to finish and to close on itself. So yeah, you need to know how much binding you need, and definitely recommend after you've measured the outside of your quilt that to add at least 6 inches to the binding. And more. More is not bad. Just means you might have a little bit of extra to cut off at the end. The next thing you need to do is to discover or to determine, where on your quilt top you're going to actually do the last join. Most people do it at the bottom because it's at the bottom. It's the last thing you're going to look at. And if you're doing it right, it won't matter because your join is going to be perfect. But that's the second thing. And then the last thing is to get yourself ready as far as tools. And they're very simple. You need pins, scissors, maybe a marking pen or something to mark a straight line. You need your 2 hands, you need your eyes, and that's about it. So, without further talking about it, let's get to it. Getting ready to start, I'm going to explain what I'm going to use to simulate binding a quilt. I've created a piece of sandwiched quilt top with this white fabric on either side and some batting in the middle. So this edge right here is going to be the edge I'm binding. I've also created 2 colors of binding strips so you'll be able to see as we go along what's what. So for each one of these you'll see that I picked a cloth or a material that the reverse side, the back side, is clearly different from the front side. Alright, I've also got my pins, scissor and marking tool ready to go. So let's get on with step 1, sewing. You're going to sew on the binding. The key part for here is determining where you're going to stop and start the binding. So I'm going to mark right here as the center where I want the join to take place with the pin. Then where you stop and start the binding, you could measure, but the fast and easy Carolyn method is to take 2 hand widths and pin. So I'm going to take 2 hand widths and pin right there. Two hand widths, pin right there. Something doesn't have to be precise. You just have to have what you're going to do now is you're giving yourself enough space to maneuver once the binding is sewn on. So then now, you notice this binding where I'm going to start has a selvage edge. This process, what you want is a nice straight edge to start. So if there hadn't been a selvage, I'd be ready to go. But there is, so I'm just going to cut it off right now. All right? And mostly straight. There we go. So I'm going to start right there. Okay? And then clearly the quilt binding when you're sewing it on is going to wrap all the way around. And it's going to end with, and if you've measured it right, you're going to have a tail. So here's my second piece. Imagine it's sewn. It's going to wrap around, and I'm going to stop sewing at the second pin right here. So I start at this pin, right there, and I stop at the second pin right there. So let's sew it. Just going to replace this again. Oh, it wouldn't hurt if you took your pin here and actually pinned it down so you know exactly where to start and it's not going to shift. All right, and same thing, I'll do the same thing here. Don't really need to because this will be the binding tail, but there we are. And now I sew it. All right, going to start sewing at the pin like I said I would. So putting it under the walking foot, which I've already said for a good 1/4 inch. Let's do it. Okay. Let's call that that. And as you can see, I've now finished. I'm pretending I'm finishing the quilt. There we go. And stopping at the needle. All right, phase 2 of this operation is now cut. Remember, we've done sew, now it's cut. So I've got my 2 tails, and you can see I've got lots of overlap. Here's my center pin. I don't need it anymore. I'll take it out. So this side, I admit I did trim it up just to make it perfectly square. I didn't do a very good cutting job. I just took off a whisker. Here's the original piece I cut off. Why is this important? I'll show you in a sec, but you do notice that it is the width of my strip, which it happens to be 2.5 inches. So now this edge is ready to go. What we need to do now is determine where to cut the detailing or the finishing edge. So here's the cool part. It's nothing more simple than you fold it on back and itself till you get a 1/4 inch. That's about a 1/4 inch there, my eyes say. Maybe you haven't figured out a 1/4 inch yet just by looking at it. Well, you could measure it. I don't need to measure it. That's close enough for biscuits. Now here is where we cut, because you recall that you need to have these 2 pieces overlap by the width of a strip. Well, there it is. So I'm placing this extra piece of binding, which is the width of my strips, 2.5 inches, to start right there. Therefore, I'm going to cut the second tail right there. I'm going to try to cut a little more carefully this time than I did last time. So here's I'm holding it there. Here we go. Nice and slow, see? Nice and slow. There we go. That's a better looking cut, eh? It's close. Again, it's a little angled, but it's gonna work. Maybe I can trim it up just a bit. I really should use bigger scissors. Okay. So this ends the cut phase. Now so I don't need this anymore. Now you need to have handy a marking utensil as an optional, unless you're really good, but you need your pins too. Now we begin the join phase. Now, look at this again. We've got the 2 tails ready to go. The trick is going to be to have the good sides come together at a 90-degree angle. So the method that I've learned, that I have seen both on the link I gave you and that Carolyn uses, you take the left-hand side, and you open it. This is clearly going to be the top. You take the right-hand side and you pivot it up. Okay? And when you open it, you're going to open the back tail out. So now you can see I've got good here, and I've got the light orange, so I've got the good facing down. Then you line them up so that they make a 90-degree bend. You have to pucker the quilt top a bit, but you line them up. And you pin them. So, I'm going to pin the first one right there. Right here. See, that looks pretty good. It's fighting me here. I'm going to tuck it in some more. Come on. There we go. Pin right there. I'm going to pin where it ends here, because we're going to be sewing there. And I'm going to pin here. This pin just came up. So now I have pinned my 90-degree goods to goods, and where you're going to sew is a diagonal, just like you did when you made your binding probably, from the corner right there to the corner right there, where I put the pin. So I'm just going to mark that now with my pen. Yeah, you probably use something that's not permanent, like pen. But this is for demonstration purposes only. So, now I can eyeball it. There we go. That's where I'm going to sew. So let's go do that. I've changed the presser foot to a regular presser foot because I find the walking foot on this machine doesn't work well with just two fabrics. It needs thicker. And here's my thing. Now, this is if the quilt were real, of course, you'd have lots of quilt to the left here. So the trickiest part with this is to get this piece you're going to sew under the presser foot. So all you have to do is twist like crazy, like this. See what I'm doing? Twisting it around. Make sure nothing gets caught underneath. And then get it to the presser foot, like this. This is the hardest part, I think, of the whole process. There we go. Got it. Mostly. Caroline makes this look so easy. There we go. And we're off. Let's not sew over the needle. I gotta be careful here or I'm gonna double sew something. I can see it. See, look at that, it's folded under. Now let's just, I've got everything not tucked out of the way. So let's just finish this seam. There we go. I've sewn it and it looks good. It lines up nicely. You got a nice join. Now, obviously you need to remove this excess fabric here. So while I said I gave you the tools ahead of time, I forgot to say you probably need a ruler and a cutter, to trim off the excess fabric. But it looks right, so it's safe to do this. So I'm gonna do that right now. There we go. There we go, it's about 1/4 inch. Didn't need to really measure it, but there we go. Done. And so, look at that. I now have a joined binding and it looks great. So now, the last step, so we've done join. The last step is, as you can probably guess, is sew. I'm just going to finish sewing this binding. And then it's done. Now, technically, I should also press this to make sure the seam is as good as possible. I'll do that too. And there you have it. I just sewed it. I decided not to show you that. But look at that. You have a beautiful join. It's nice and flush. There's no puckering on either side. It looks good. One binding joined using sew, cut, join, and sew. I just finished the sew. So, as it were, this is the process that works every time for finishing and joining the tails of a binding. I took the liberty of actually pressing it around and it looks like a perfect binding with a wonderful seam. Nice and smooth. So, again, to recap, here are the 4 steps with a bit of extra. So if you need to refer to this at some point later on, you can come right to here and use this. The steps. First step, sew. Make sure you make the binding long enough. Mark where the start and end of the sewing spots are for each tail. Place the tails in the right spots and then sew them on. For cut. Trim up the left-hand tail, make it nice and 90 degree, getting rid of the selvage edge if you need to. Fold over the right tail, and then using a strip of excess binding at its full width, measure where your cut line is by placing the left side on the beginning of the fold, and the right side you cut. And then cut it. For join. This is the trickiest part, but it's easy. You're going to fold open your two tails, but be careful how you fold them so you make sure you place goods to goods and then have a 90-degree layover between the two pieces. Then you mark the diagonal and you sew the diagonal. Then check it. And if you're happy with it, trim off the excess fabric. And then finally, the last sew phase is straightforward. You would have done this anyway. You finish the binding tails, sewing that are now joined. You sew them onto the quilt, and then you can admire your wonderful work. So that's it. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of Quilting with Don. As I say, I've taken a shot at teaching something, and I hope it works for you.